Commander Thomas Zimmerman, Callsign Franz. Welcome. Glad to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Evan. I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, me too. I was doing some, prep last night for the show, and usually I do kind of a longer intro for everybody, but I realized, I'm talking to a Blue Angel solo. You're used to going like 0.95 Mach at 20 feet off the deck for the last 3 years. So let's just cut the formalities and just get right into it. What do you say?
I love it. That's definitely the solo way.
Can I start off by asking you about your call sign, actually, Franz? I know a lot of people know what it is, but do you have a story that you can share here? If it's not PG, feel free. We can offline later.
I guess I'm lucky enough that mine is PG. For those, it comes from the SNL skit, but I showed up to my first squadron with another guy who we went through most of flight school together. He's about 6'3", has about 20 to 30 pounds on me. He showed up about 2 to 3 weeks prior to me. Instead of being FNG 1 and 2, they're like, "Oh, you're going to be Hans and Franz." And we're like, okay, all right. Then we fast forward, a couple weeks later, we go on a detachment to Key West to do some air-to-air stuff. And there's a bunch of people leaving the squadron. They're like, "Hey, you're going to host this event for us. So go figure it out where we're going to have it and all that." So me and Hans were like, okay, well, obviously we got to dress up in the gray sweatsuits. We watched a whole bunch of YouTube videos on SNL. We learned the accents. And then that's kind of how it came to be. After we hosted the whole event as Hans and Franz, they were like, "All right, your call signs are solid."
So for those of watching at home who may not know who you are, which is probably not many, but I do want to formally introduce you a little bit. You were on the team 2023, 2024, and 2025, doing the solo tour 765, and we're going to talk about a lot of stuff here today. We're going to talk about your career and time on the team, and definitely get into some nitty gritty technical stuff towards the end, as I always love to do. But I wanted to start kind of at the end of things, because it's the most fresh, and I think as we sit here, it hasn't even been 2 weeks, right, since your last demo. So I wanted to get a sense from you, kind of like a vibe check, how are you feeling? If I introduce you as a former Blue Angel, how does that sit with you?
Evan, it's interesting. That question has been asked multiple times. I don't think it truly has sunk in yet, with us only being about 9 days or 10 days away from our last flight. But for sure, I've spent the past couple of days at home and watching the team take off and go out to the air to practice. I think it's, like everyone, it was time to move on, and it's time to pass it on to the 2026 team.
Was there a moment in that final demo that you did where it kind of hit you, like, this is the last time I'm going to do this?
I think in the final one, almost every single time, it's hard. You got to kind of compartmentalize in the sense of don't let that kind of creep in. Because what we always say is the demo is just as dangerous on day one of practice to the very end. So try not to let that complacency and that kind of emotion almost get in there. But there were definitely moments that we have in the solo profile where you can take a second to kind of, as we say, stop and smell the roses or just enjoy. And there definitely were out of the dirty roll for sure. I was like, well, I'll never get to do that again in the rest of my life if I want to keep my job. Kind of out of the last pitch up break on downwind, I was like, all right, well, that's it. All we got to do now is safely land. And, once you kind of unstrap for the last time, it kind of a flood of emotions, but it's good.
So I should check in a year or two, see how you're feeling then.
I heard the demo only gets better and better the farther you get away from having flown it. So
yeah, of course, because you're not picking at it. Yeah. So let's walk it sort of all the way back. I want to understand how did you get into aviation in the first place? Was it something you a lot of people were into as a kid and then grew from there?
Yeah. So my dad had an interest in aviation and ended up getting his private pilot's license when I was a little kid. So that's kind of what introduced me to aviation, and he would take me flying in first a Cessna, and then he ended up getting a Bonanza, and I kind of grew up around that. I was born in 1986, which is the original Top Gun. And my dad was a huge fan of that. So that was constantly playing on the background of our TVs in our house. So that's kind of what introduced me to it. And then as a kid, being from Maryland, we used to go down to Annapolis every year and watch the Blue Angels fly from Hospital Point. So I always remember being down there. First, as a young kid, what I remember the most is there used to be an obstacle course out there, and climbing and playing on the obstacle course while the jets were flying. But as I got older, actually watching the jets. So that's what kind of interests me in aviation to begin with.
Got it. Well, that was going to be one of my next questions anyway. Yeah. So you were introduced to the Blue Angels from a young age. I guess you never got to see, you and I both never got to see the A4s, right? It was always the F-18s.
That's correct. Yeah, just always F-18s.
Eventually, you ended up in the Navy. Was that a direct result of that interest that you had in aviation, the Blue Angels, and all that as a kid?
I think it's definitely a factor from it. I actually played lacrosse throughout high school, and ended up getting recruited to play at the Naval Academy. And it was when Coach John Tillman came up to visit, and he brought a binder and was like, "Hey, going through the Naval Academy and showing all these different things." And then he shows a picture of an airplane, an F-18 being shot off the front of an aircraft carrier, and he's like, "And this could be your job after you leave school." And I was like, "Man, that's pretty awesome. Something I'd like to be a part of." So that's kind of what got me. And then visiting the school and the lacrosse team there really is what was sunk me in, and knew that was 100% what I wanted to do.
And what was that like the first time you got to be catapulted off the deck of an aircraft carrier?
The first time, it's like a car crash, but in the opposite direction, both the landing and the takeoff. And I honestly, I remember being exhilarating, but that was about it. Your mind is it is quite an experience the first time because you're by yourself. There's no instructor with you. There's no one with you. There's a lot going on.
And then I imagine you pretty quickly have to switch over to like, oh yeah, I gotta, fly this jet.
Yeah, I tell everyone, I was like, being shot off the front of an aircraft carrier is like, the coolest roller coaster ride that you get to control at the end of it is pretty awesome. There's nothing like being in the middle of the ocean and getting shot off the front, and there's nothing else around.
Well, I imagine landing is probably equally as interesting.
Yeah, I remember a few times where I'm like, you take the cat shot and you get shut off the front, and then you realize it's a no moon night, it's dark, it's cloudy, it's raining, and you're like, there's nowhere else to land but back on this thing, and you're like, now you got an hour and a half or so to think about it.
Since we're on the subject, I wanted to settle something that has come up, and I think I know the answer, but I want to hear from a primary source. When you're on the team, do you lose your carrier qualification?
Yeah, while you're on the team, you lose your carrier qualification. Generally, you got to stay within a year of a night trap is typically what defines that. And then after that year, then you got to go back through a syllabus. That's where you'll go to one of the FRSs, whether that's for the F-18 folks, VFA 122 in Lemoore, or VFA 106 in Oceana, or our Growler folks, VAQ 129 up in Whidbey Island.
So do you have to go do that now that you're off the team?
Yeah, so part of my whole next track to becoming eventually an executive officer and commanding officer of a squadron is going back through not only a CQ or a carrier qualification syllabus, but I'll get a fighter refresh as well as a air to surface refresh syllabus. Luckily, they skip out on the formation flying piece for us.
They figure you got that covered off, yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of Blue Angels talk about, they sometimes have to rush the team multiple times in order to get accepted. Was that your experience? Did you apply multiple times, or did you get in first shot?
Kind of interesting. So obviously a little more senior than what you've probably seen in the solo profile rank-wise. So not my first right out of my JO tour. So it was actually out of my department head tour as an 04. Looking at that and having looked at the history of the team and knowing that generally people don't get picked up on their first time, I actually did what's called a pre-rush, where I knew I was like, hey, I can't get picked up. My commanding officer is not going to say, hey, we're going to let you go in the middle of the deployment to join the team. So I did a pre-rush year in 2021, and then my official rush was in 2022, and was fortunate enough to be selected that year.
When that phone rang, did you think you were going to get it?
So if you ask my wife, she did. Naturally, they've got to give everyone a little bit of a hard time. But I remember got called Boss Kesselring, and he's also a Top Gun guy. And he's like, I got you about 15 seconds late on your phone call. Why don't you try back at like this time? And I'm like, and it just hangs up, and I'm like, oh my goodness. So I'm like, asking him, I'm like, Emily, I was like, give me your phone. And I'm like on the Naval Observatory, like looking at the official time, trying to calculate how long is it going to take to ring. And she's like, she knew at that point. And meanwhile, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm like, I can't even get this right. And then I call back and they're like, oh, welcome to the team. So
they like to mess with you.
Yeah.
So yeah, we actually saw some of this in the documentary that came out, I guess last year now. You were featured in there, and we saw like some of the centrifuge training that happened there, and we saw that Boss and Stalin passed out in the centrifuge, and we didn't really see like definitively whether or not you passed out. So I wanted to ask you, did you pass out in the centrifuge?
I did not pass out in the centrifuge, uh, but there's
Okay,
funny stuff that go along with that. If you want, I can
go
keep
ahead.
going. You do as a khaki newbie after you get selected, all the pilots will go down to the training, and the first thing we try to walk in and Doc Monaco was like, "All right, well, we're not wearing our covers correctly, the Blue Angel way," and there's so much training that happens to that whole process before it's really showcased to the public, and we got thrust into that day one. And it was interesting as we go through day one where you're wearing a G suit. They're, telling Boss and Amanda, like, you guys have a great G strain. Like, you're really good. They're like, Franz, not so much. I don't know what you're doing. But you're working way too hard. Okay. Day two happens, and Alex passes out, and Amanda passes out. And they're like, well, good luck, Franz. You're probably not going to do much better. And I was like, oh, no. They were much kinder than those words, but that's kind of what rung in my head.
Yeah.
So I had actually had to I got to prove someone wrong. So I was like, whatever it takes, I'm not going to pass out. So that will forever be captured in IMAX now.
That must be interesting having your face doing all those G strains and on a 70-foot screen or something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. My kids say it looks scary, and I don't disagree with them. So
You're not like selected as 7, right? So Boss obviously was selected as 1, but that left you and Amanda. And like, how was that determination made? Like, who's making that determination? Who's going to go where? When is that decided? Like, is that before obviously it would have to be before the new training season begins? And like, are there like criteria or like reasons for the selection, or how does that all work?
kind of going, starting with like the khaki newbie process. So any of the pilots, obviously minus Boss. So this past year we had 3 new pilots show up, and we needed a new 2, a new 3, and a new 7. That's kind of the positions that we're going to pick. And from there, there's a whole khaki newbie training plan where we're going to give them exposure. We give them flights, whether it's circles and demos, from the 2 spot, the 4 spot, and the 5 spot. So they kind of get a little bit of that. They'll do a little shadowing the number 7 as well. That all kind of happens in the first about 2 to 3 weeks of them joining us. And then typically it's the Friday of the San Francisco show. After that Friday practice, going into the Saturday show, we'll do position selection from there. And then we'll actually listen to what each pilot would like to be. But then from there, there's things we'll look at, such as kind of personality. Where do we feel they'll mesh based off the job and what's kind of required of that job? Whether it's 2 and are they going to be able to instruct a new boss who's going to be senior to them, a 3 that's going to be the overall training officer, or a number 7 who's going to essentially be out on their own for the majority of the season and making pretty large decisions for the team. So there's some things that go in there, such as that. There's also from our own, the Navy, we'll get some career timing implications on, can we afford for someone to be there for 3 years, or maybe can they only be a 2-year player? So there's a bunch of different things that go in there. A very small part of that is what they would like as well.
Did you want to be a solo?
Yeah, absolutely. The 765 route was what I was hoping for, and I was very fortunate that that's what I got to do.
I figured. I kind of figured.
Yeah. Yeah.
Could you give us like a top level, for someone who's not familiar, like super top level, the progression that you go through from 765? Like, what are the key roles and responsibilities in each year, and how do you sort of transition between them?
Starting out, your first year is number 7. You start out right away. You go on what's called winter visits. So right now, 7 and 8 are going and visiting all 32 show sites. And they'll generally visit about 2 cities a day. And they're going to go through and they're going to look at the schedule. They're going to look at the show site and start building and seeing, like, where can the airplanes park? Where are we going to park our vehicles? How are we going to get from point A to point B? What hotel are we going to stay at? Is the gym acceptable? All these things of, that make the show site. So they kind of start that here. And that's really largely an 8 responsibility. And as 7, you kind of get eyes on a little bit and start building, like, where could some friction points be? So then fast forward, you're also during this entire time working on memorizing the narration. So we've got 4 different shows: a high show, a low show, a flat roll, and a flat show. And then we also have a bunch of different filler that you'll have memorized as well. Now you start out memorizing it, and then we'll have actual professional narrator come out and work with us. For me, it was Rob Ryder, who came out
Oh,
and helped me.
nice.
And we worked on things such as aircraft and pronouncing the T, to different little nuances to kind of take the demo and make it more human and make the general public feel connected to it. Not that they're just airplanes flying. It makes it a little more personal. So that's where you kind of start, and then you're going to start mixing in some rides in there as well. So typically we'll do some of the team rides. So typically any outgoing team members from the troop side, the enlisted side, are going to ride. So you start working on your ride profile. And then at the end of El Centro, it's the El Centro show. And that's where kind of the roles now switch, and you're like the advanced party. So you go a day early to every single show site. And then when you get there, you're going to brief the entire air show team on, hey, here's the schedule, here's where the team's going to be moving, here's how we're going to be moving from point A to point B, and then kind of here's our requirements that we have. They're also going to have a what we call a 7 geek, which is a one of our enlisted team members who's trained to be in that position and as a crew chief, and they're going to be there as well. And they kind of divide and conquer. So the 7 geek will work on things such as parking. So we'll put down tape on the parking spots, and hey, and that's where 7 will kind of be in there. Be like, the turn in's a little bit short. We need to add a couple feet here, and do we need to work with the air show and move the fence line, or is there anything we can adjust? All the way to is the center point marker. So normally you'll see a white trailer or some sort of bus or something at the center point. Our number 7 pilot will place that, and then during their flights throughout the day, they're going to also check the show line, make sure it's it's straight and all sorts of stuff like that. And then we have ground support equipment, and then they'll also get that checked along with the 7 geeks to make sure we have everything that we need to support all the F-18s that are going to be there and the C-130 for the air show.
Then you're on to 6 after that, right?
Yeah, so your 7 year, you're on the road. I think I calculated I was on the road about 330-ish days. So that meant I spent about 30 some nights in my own bed here in Pensacola. So your 6 year is the first time where you get an opportunity where your only responsibility generally is to fly. To learn the demo, learn the profile from there, and then you're also the applicant's officer, which is it's still a pretty good responsibility, but you've just been used to moving around 140 people from show site to show site, or 65 people from show site to show site. So wrangling 5 to 8 people at a show is a little bit easier. So that'll be your responsibility, and it's only about the first half of the season. Rest other than that, your job is to completely immerse yourself in the demo, learn how to fly the jet, learn how to fly the profile, and also during that entire time, you're in a turnover with 5, trying to take over and learn the OPSO responsibility and those things.
Got it. And then you're on to 5 next year, right?
Yeah, and then your last year, you're number 5. So when you were 7, we write our air show schedule 2 years out. So that schedule was actually written by number 7, who will be number 5 during their air show season. And then your job is to then execute that from what days are we going to leave, when are we coming home, all those things. To are we doing photo shoots? Are we doing any of these extra stuff? To the day-to-day airspace scheduling. And then also a big responsibility is also working with our maintenance officer and making sure that, hey, we have operational requirements, but we also have maintenance requirements. And any good squadron, if maintenance is driving ops, that's not great. If ops is driving maintenance, that's not great either. There's got to be a good bond and a good give take there. So that was also a large part of the responsibility.
The solo tour is 3 years versus the Diamond's 2-year tour. What is the thinking behind that?
I'll only speak to what I've heard via the pass down and via what other former team members have told me. But if you look at the history, you'll see a lot of what we call 7.75 or 7.34. And then they realized sometime, don't quote me, like 70s, 80s time frame, they're like, the sixth position, we're having a hard time keeping pilots. And it's a very, very challenging profile. It's a very demanding on your body, on your concentration, on everything. So like, hey, we can take someone who has had a year of Blue Angel experience and roll them into the sixth role. And then now you also get to be the operations officer kind of at the end and run that. I'm not sure if they previously used to have four kind of was the operations officer and training officer and kind of did a little bit of everything. And that may have been why they kind of did it. But now when we kind of look at that transition, in my mind, it gives you a really good baseline because you spend an entire year as seven with the airshow community, seeing operations, seeing all that stuff work from the ground. And the only person that's at the air boss stand, at the narration stand, and kind of interacting. And then you get a year to learn the demo piece. And then now you can take those two pieces together as the operations officer to kind of run a safe and successful show season.
With any organization that's 80 years old this next year,
Yeah.
You learned from the experiences of the past, and it seems like that was a problem, and you fixed it, and it seems like it's been going well, so that's great.
Yeah.
I want to take each of those years, like dive a little bit more into each of those years that you're on the team. And I want to start with 7 because I was going to ask you about the narration. And I've always been like fascinated by the narration piece, and you just added another fascinating wrinkle, which is you worked with Rob Ryder to get to get stuff right. Rob Ryder's a legend.
Yes.
It's always been interesting to me because like you're not an actor, you're a fighter pilot, right? But you're kind of being asked to memorize like a play's worth of narration and be like, you're giving a performance, right, to the audience and being that human connection, as you said. Like, is there, aside from like, well, first of all, I guess, what was it like working with Rob Ryder to like train that?
I was very fortunate that we worked with Rob Ryder, and I saw him at a couple of shows. So specifically at Naval Air Station Jacksonville, he was there, and I was standing on the narration stand, and so I had a pretty good working relationship with him already beforehand. But that first day when he comes out to El Centro and you close the door, and he's like, "All right, let's start from the top," and you just start with your good, and you go from there, and then he'll just kind of stop you and work on things. And every former 7 has the couple little things that he just really nugged down on and was like, "Hey, we need to work on this." And I had a couple. One of mine was General Electric, and he didn't like the way I pronounced it, so I spent a lot of time working on General Electric to the point where we actually almost called them and we're like, "Can we just say GE?" And they're like, "No, we'd prefer if it could be this way." So, but yeah, it's different being in a room, and like you said, it's just something you never trained for throughout your entire career. You've been trained to fly airplanes, work the operations side a little bit, for my department head tour on the maintenance side and the inspections and things that go with that, but never to formal training on how to stand in front of a crowd of sometimes 100-some thousand people and, deliver a message and make them feel encapsulated, make them feel like they're part of it, not just reading off a script where it's just, not as personal.
And you mentioned having all the different like variations memorized as well, if there's high show, low show, all that stuff. But there's also stuff like, an aircraft drops out for maintenance and all of a sudden you're dealing with the 3 diamond pilots and, they have 6 engines producing this amount of thrust instead of, the usual 8. Like, did you have all those contingencies memorized as well?
You memorize all the kind of contingencies, and there's little tricks that we've kind of passed down, whether it's, however many airplanes and different things. Because if it's 5 airplanes for the Delta, we technically call it the big V, but it's still in the narration called the Delta. So it gets a little funky with some of those things, but luckily you spend pretty much every day in El Centro narrating. So at some point you'll probably see some of those variations. And if not, that's where kind of you'll think through the, hey, what happens if someone falls out here? Or how are we going to narrate this? Or, what kind of changes kind of from that aspect? And that's where if you look at a narrator from show 1 to the last show, and you took the narration, you were to compare them, they're actually probably slightly different because they're going to fall more into what they're comfortable and what words actually they would use. When you start, this is what I have memorized. And then you kind of put your own twist on it.
Got it. And do you have everybody's like all the everybody's name and where they're from? That's all memorized. That's all in your head too.
For all the officers are memorized. For the troops, there's about 65 of them, and they change out every show site, and they're different, and they'll be in different positions. So that's the only time where we'll have like a little list to kind of reference as we go through that. And as I told everyone, I was
Okay.
like, that was my least favorite part because I should have just memorized it. Reading out loud in school, like I dreaded that, and that's basically brought me right back to that. Now I'm reading aloud in front of thousands of people.
And how deep is it in your brain? Like if I were to ask you right now to narrate, like could you do it?
Uh, if you gave me, I could do a good bit of the narration, um, but it'd probably take me about a week and I could have it all back. The hard part really is the team name and team members that have transitioned to different positions. That's always a fun one when boss gets promoted in the middle of a season, or someone gets promoted in the middle of a season, and that'll happen often where you may demote them a couple of times throughout.
Whoops.
Yeah.
You can do it to the other guys, just don't do it to boss. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you have any memorable VIP flights? Were there like who was the most famous person that you got to fly?
Probably the most famous, I flew Roquan Smith from the Baltimore Ravens, linebacker, as well as I flew Tom Segura, comedian. Those are probably if you were to ask anyone, they're probably the most famous. Um, one of the most memorable that I flew was one of my very first ones on the road. It was actually Harley Hall, and his dad was a former boss of the Blue Angels, and I'm sure maybe you know this already. Dad was boss of the Blue Angels. He left, I think, VF 143 as a CO to go over to Vietnam. And when he left, his wife was 2 months pregnant, 2 or 3 months pregnant, with his son Harley Hall II. Unfortunately, he was, I believe, one of the last naval aviators to be shot down and unfortunately killed. So his dad, he never met his dad, but it was incredible to be able to share the experience of the Blue Angels and bring, their family in and kind of show them all of that and share that with him. And uh, man, for an executive chef, he wanted to do absolutely everything, and we pulled 7.5 Gs multiple times. I mean, we did it all, and he did not want to hold back. And just an incredible rider, incredible man, and it was a very special experience to be able to share that with him, and kind of give him a look into what his father had done.
I want to transition over to your next year as six in 2024. You talked about it a little bit earlier. The transition there from doing the seven stuff to actually doing the flying, and I wanted if you could expand on that a little bit and say like what is it like jumping into the demo for the first time, because you've, unlike everybody else who's coming into the demo for the first time, you've had a year of experience. So what is that transition like?
Yeah, so the transition will start kind of at the end of the year, same time when we're giving the khaki newbies the kind of turnover flights. Seven will get a couple flights with six to kind of learn the profile or kind of at least get exposure to it. I will say definitely not learning the profile. Uh, I would say the biggest thing is that at seven, you start off and you're so uncomfortable talking in front of thousands of people, and then at the end you're like, I put 100,000 people out there, it's fine. And then you get into the airplane and you're like, oh my goodness, am I going to be able to do this? And that is eye opening. The first time you fly with six and you're like, they're calling 10 seconds, Mark 4.0, all those things. And you're like, I'm just trying to stay awake back here. And here you are talking and doing all this stuff. And so looking at it, I think that's more so what that turnover flight is going into 6 years to give you again, an awakening to how inherently difficult flying these airplanes in the manner in which the Blue Angels do is. Um, and then you start back over day one and, you work with five, and now we're trying to say, can we fly the stopwatch in front of us? Can we start the stopwatch at the same time? Can we turn the smoke on and off at the same time? And we go back to the very basics. Can we turn left and right together? And, that's it. And so it's a very crawl, walk, run phase, but it's daunting at first. But then after, a week into winter training, you're like, you know what? I'm glad I'm not on the road doing winter visits, and I'm at home with my family every night. And I'm also getting to fly these airplanes the way they're meant to be flown, which is really cool.
Year 5 was Pushpop. Can you talk a little bit about like the dynamic you had with him and how he trained you?
Pushpop was awesome. I felt bad for him because he's probably looked at me. I remember when I put on O5 as a commander, he looked at me one day and he's like, do you want me to, do I call you sir every time or like what? I'm like, no, dude. I'm like, we're good. I was like, you're training me. I was like, I'm your student. You don't have to call me sir. Even though I technically outrank you. So that was funny. But he was a very patient instructor, which was nice. And he would allow me to make mistakes safely that we could, which was great from there. And he had a very good temperament of his ability to kind of see when we would reach what we would call like diminishing returns, where it's like we just can't get the knife edge wing set perfect as we're working out there and over the water. I'm like, can I get 2 or 3 more? He's like, we're good. Let's move on to inverted or whatever. So he's had the perfect temperament of that, as well as his just leadership style in the ready room was awesome. Just like a very quiet, able to take everything in, and just when he spoke, it was important, and just a great guy to follow and great guy to learn from. I was very fortunate.
You hold the distinction, in my mind at least, of being like the loudest six ever. When you came over the top of the sneak pass over people's heads, like whatever you were doing, like I'd love for you to talk about like what were you doing differently, because you were so much louder than every other six I've ever seen.
So it's interesting, and I think this is where I took as like 7 and 6 is I really tried to dive in and learn the airplane and every little nuance. And hey, we adjust this variable. So you're trying to get to Mach 0.95 over the crowd. Well, if you're Mach 0.95 at a mile to going over your engines, you're kind of actually you're back on the throttles as you get there. So what I learned over time of flying that profile was I wanted to hit Mach 0.95 about just behind the crowd. So basically, as I was going over the crowd, we're hitting Mach 0.95. The jet is in max AB, which makes it the loudest. So it was a lot of variables, a lot of trial and error. And this is where the ComCart and all the folks there are the best resource for that, because they see a ton of shows, they see a bunch of stuff. And then I would brief them on, hey, I'm going to try to change this variable a little bit today. Can you let me know what you think? And that's kind of where we ended up with that, is that it was working the acceleration profile for the sneak to be, we hit Mach 0.95 right as we hit the crowd line. We're in max AB. And then as soon as you cross the crowd line, that's where we'll be out of max AB and turn the smoke on as we start the pull to the vertical and start the sneak to vertical rolls. So I think that's what did it, but it's not an easy thing.
Well, Buddy didn't really do it this year, and I'm like, can we get a petition to get Goldie to do whatever you did next year? Because I want it back. Speaking of the vertical rolls that happen right after that, I've noticed sometimes in training, 6 will not do all the rolls. They'll just do like 1 or 2 maybe, and then pull off. Is there a reason for that?
The sneak to vertical rolls, it'll depend on the airspace. So that's the highest maneuver that we have. And typically what you'll run out of, either you run out of airspeed or you run out of airspace at the top of the maneuver. So when we practice here at Pensacola, and if anyone that listens into the comms, you'll usually hear 5 will say, hey, behind the crowd for the sneak to singular vertical roll. And that's usually a reminder to 6 that, hey, we only have the airspace to 10,000 feet, which you can only do about 1 roll to get to 10,000 feet, going from 0.95. So that's typically it. There could be other things that if the rolls get too loose, whether they're positive or negative G, you can get some nose or tail wander. The Super Hornet's very great about that with some nerdy stuff called beta debuilder and blah, blah, blah things. But that's sometimes those kind of stop if it kind of starts to wander weird from that direction. Or it would be airspeed, but generally after 2 rolls, you're not going to lose the airspeed. Normally that's after about 8 rolls or so, you start getting slow and you need to stop the roll so you can actually recover the airplane.
So moving on to your final year, this year, 2025, everybody, I guess, on the team goes through the process of saying goodbye to team members, right? Because there's half the officers, and I think it's like a third of the enlisted and leave every year, right?
Yep, that's good.
But five, I guess, because you're there for 3 years, you kind of have it a little bit worse than everybody else in terms of saying goodbye to everybody. Like you said goodbye to your fellow khaki newbies a year early. Like, what is that process like? Shaking up the makeup of the team every year and saying goodbye.
I coined myself the village elder as five, as you've been around the longest. Um, at the end of the 6 year, I would say that last demo is very emotional because it is, Amanda and I went through uh, finalist week. We went through everything together. We also knew each other from the fleet, and then that was it. And it's over. Same thing with Scribe. So that one's very emotional, saying goodbye to all those folks. But then the next year, it was me and Sam Petco, M1 were the 3 years or third years that are left. Um, so that is for sure emotional. And then into your last year, the nice thing and the piece is that the rest of the ready room for this past year, 16 officers, 14 of them have only had, 1 to 2 years of experience. So as the third years, both Sam and myself were able to talk about the changes and how the team dynamic and all those things to make sure, I've heard that great organizations change, they just don't change overnight. And I feel like that's where M1 and 5 kind of have that ability to tie in and be like, hey, maybe we should call some former team members and see, because we generally haven't thought of anything new. We're not that original. Someone's thought about it, and maybe they didn't do it for this reason or that reason from there. But so that's kind of where it is. And then, in your last year, I kind of told Buddy, I was like, as 5 and M1, I was like, occasionally we can be the bad people in the sense of, it's tougher to be hard on someone who you've gone through the process with and, is right there as kind of a peer. Whereas 5 and M1 are the only ones that are not peers with anyone else in there from Blue Angel experience. So it gave you kind of a unique role.
That ties into the whole role of the ops officer, OPSO. Can you expand a little bit on like, I know you talked about it a little bit, but like what does the OPSO do? And like how do you balance the huge responsibility of that with, the huge responsibility of not only flying in the demo, but also training Buddy and leading the whole solo program?
It's a lot. It's funny is at the Blue Angels as OPSO, I had myself. As OPSO for VFA 11 and the Rippers, I had an assistant operations officer, I had 2 training officers, and I had 3 schedzos. And I had a gunner. I had multiple people to help me do the same job. And here you are as a one person doing all of those things. You get really good at time management. And that's where I joke, I used to say before the Blue Angels, like, if it's only 15, I was like 15 minutes. Psh, I was like, whatever, that's not much time. Now I'm like, if it's 5 minutes, I was like, 5 minutes is a big chunk of time. If I could buy that back, that's a lot of time in my life. So I think that was the big thing is just coming up with a schedule that I could adhere to for myself on each day, whether that's, on this day I'm going to draft the schedule. On this day I'm scheduling airspace, and all those things so that the day-to-day operations were kind of set in stone. And then that gave me more free time for, hey, we're having an issue with this, or hey, this change, or this airspace is no longer available. We need to make this phone call, and all those things. Or, hey, we have a jet needs to get FCF'd or functional check flight. So building that base, I think, is what helped me with all those things, as well as, it's nice having 6 who is watched the demo for a year. So you kind of can help them, guide them, be like, hey, let's look at these things, be like, tell me what you think. And then if you need to, you can really dive into tapes or dive into whatever with them and, go frame by frame as need be.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about that a little bit actually. So for the Diamond, it's kind of the progression throughout the season is kind of really obvious. Like there's much made about the Yankee set and they get closer and closer and closer. And that's really obvious when you're looking at it, if you know what you're looking for. But I feel like it's less obvious for the solos because you're not doing that kind of flying. So what are the like markers and things that you look for and signposts like throughout the year of, here's how we're going to improve, like here's how we're going to tighten things up? Like what are the criteria you're looking at there?
The only thing that maybe, if you look at like the very first demo to the last demo, would be the minimum altitudes or min outs. As we get more proficient, those will get lower and lower. The piece that's harder to see would be for six. Six will actually get closer to five in setting what we call crowd, which is the distance between five and six. At the same time, generally the things that we're getting better at that no one's going to see are all what we call the timing pattern. So hopefully six is getting more consistent in the timing pattern. We're flying more similar. That way we're meeting at center point. And then every time we go to center point, we have different grades. And every time we leave, we'll ask MO or AMO for the grade. So center point nice being the best grade that we can receive. And that's kind of where we will track that via our notes. And look and be like, hey, where are we struggling for different things? So we'll look at each of those, but that's kind of the big piece. And then there's the whole teamwork piece as to how do you get a center point nice. It's not just five, it's not just six. It's both of us working together to make that happen. If one of us is messing up on one thing, then it's going to make the other person work harder to try and correct and all that stuff. So that's where that kind of real teamwork piece comes from it. And what people won't see in the background is we start out with the standard deviations that we would have in the beginning of the season versus what we have at the end of the season. The tolerances that we're going to have for those are much smaller. So at the beginning of the season, we're like, hey, if we can keep everything inside 500 feet of show center, that's great. By the end of the season, we're like, we better be able to keep everything inside 100 feet, and now you're talking about, we're trying to keep everything inside 100 feet. And then the grading tolerance for the airplane overlap is getting tighter. So all those things that generally is not everyone's not going to see, but is something that we are constantly working towards. And then we've got different maneuvers and different things that'll add in other variables that make it even more challenging.
Can you expand a little bit on the what you just talked about with six setting the timing pattern? Because I know one of you, I believe it's six, is sort of like trying to keep a consistent flight, speed and all that stuff. And then I guess as five, you're trying to pull back or go forward to match him. Can you like expand on how that works?
Yeah, absolutely. So starting from the six profile, so that's what they're probably working on right now, is you're going to work on what's called a timing pattern. So for anyone that's done any sort of aviation, military aviation style stuff, essentially it's similar to, we have a high, a low, and a flat show timing pattern. And it's like a 45 to 60 degree roll in. And that starts out at about 4.5 miles from show center. And all this is going to be predicated on cues from the diamond. So when the diamond is in a certain spot, or diamond has certain comm that they're going to say, five will start the comm cadence of anyone that's listened to it. You're here, let me know when you're a beam, which is an arbitrary thing. Then six will say a beam, let me know when you're ready to take a mark. Take a mark from six, stand by, mark it. And then there's a silent go. We're going to hit our clocks 3 times. And then now six is going to basically do his best or her best to be at 10 seconds, be exactly at 4 nautical miles and roughly 300 knots ground. Then at 20 seconds, they should be at 3 miles and 400 knots ground. 29 seconds at 2 miles, 400 knots ground. 38 seconds at 1 mile, 400 knots ground. And then we should cross center point at 47 seconds after we started our clocks. So six is basically going to try and fly that profile. Five is going to make all the corrections off of that so that we try to meet at center point. And then five is going to set what we call the minimum altitude. So if the minimum altitude, say for the knife edge at the end of the season, was 150 feet. So five is going to try and be exactly at 150 feet crossing center point. That way that six can look outside and know, is this a 1,200 foot show line or a 1,500 foot show line? And how much do I need to be stepped up, or how much higher do I need to be than five to make it look like we're level? And this is where the piece is, as five, if I was doing a lot of math and trying to calculate my changes in ground speed, that's a lot of brain cells and brain power going to that are not going to staying as perfectly level and being at the min out which then now makes 6 job harder, and you can see how that vicious cycle can get challenged.
You make it look easy. It's like anything that the team does. You make it look really easy, but
Yeah,
there's a
yeah.
lot of work going on behind the scenes to get
Well,
you guys
for
crossing at
20
center
years
point.
spending, if this train's going this fast and this train's going this fast, how do we make them meet at the train station in the middle? But
Lots of
it's
math.
a lot of
Yeah.
fun, a lot of fun, a lot of
Yeah.
math.
So if any kids are out there watching and you want to be a Blue Angel, you got to do
Yeah.
your math homework. So I want to talk about the shutdown. So obviously this was not a great thing, to put it lightly. And we're not going to talk politics here. I mean, if you want to drop your nuclear hot take about politics, I'm not going to stop you. But obviously it was a huge blow to like air show fans everywhere to have have you not show up to a lot of shows and have some shows just get outright canceled. And then specifically for you and everyone on the team who it was your last year, there's the whole aspect of not getting the usual homecoming send off that you usually get. So I wanted to talk about like when you were in that shutdown, it lasted about a month or so. You were doing regular practices every day. Obviously, you had to stay current. But was the hope that you would be able to jump right back in if the government were to reopen? You could just get back on the road and finish out the shows.
That was the challenging part, is that essentially we were running 2 schedules simultaneously the entire time. One is no one expected us to be at home doing this. So it's working with all the tenant commands that are here at Sherman Field. And now we're taking up another hour of their airspace time over the field. So it was rewriting and now trying to work with the airfield, work with everyone else to make sure that, hey, can we still get our practice in? At the same time, I'm working with our number 8 and trying to figure out when is the air show, what's the latest they're willing to accept us? Are they still going to have an air show if we don't go? And then also from them now taking from the team, what is our latest that we're willing to accept? Generally what we found is if we could have had something that would have passed by Friday evening that would allow us to go Saturday morning, we could have flown there, circled Saturday morning, flown to practice Saturday, show Sunday, and then flown home on Sunday for the close ones. Now, when we talked San Francisco and Salinas, that was where it was a little bit different, and we were lucky enough that we got to stay, we left on October 2nd rather than right on the morning October 1st, in the sense of once you transit the jets all the way back to the East Coast, it is a full day process to get them back out there, and then everyone's time changes and, all those pieces. So that was probably a big challenge, was trying to work with that and be as forthright and honest with everyone and be like, hey, this is what we're waiting for. Because, unfortunately, these shows are catching flack from everyone and be like, well, I heard the Blue Angels already canceled, and all these things were like, well, we haven't canceled yet. We're doing our best. It's we have our lines in the sand, and unfortunately that's not going to be for anyone that's going to go to the show on a Saturday. Doesn't want to hear on Saturday morning that the Blue Angels aren't going to be there. They wanted that information prior, especially for, I'm sure people are traveling some great distances and spending some money to kind of go see that air show.
And once it became clear that it wasn't going to end in time and like the homecoming show got canceled and all that, did you start to do things differently in terms of like, you're still flying and you're still going to put on that final show, but did you like transition over to like, I'm thinking of like training next year's team earlier than you normally would have or stuff like that?
The thing that was unfortunate is because we weren't on the road, the khaki newbies only got to see Oceana and Miramar were the only 2 shows that they saw kind of from start to finish, which I remember as a khaki newbie, those 2 shows, and all I was trying to figure out is what uniform to be in and where to be on time, and that was about all I could do. So we missed out on a lot of that turnover piece on being at a commit, going to schools, going to different events and the public speaking aspect and all that. So that's where we try to take some of that stuff. And for the folks that anyone around here in Pensacola knows that we switched runways. We went to runway 119 here, vice 725, which is the normal runway we're on. And the idea behind that, once we could kind of go there, was we decided who was going to be 7, but that 7 had never been on the road to set a center point trailer to show Comcart where they need to be and to try and work all those coordination pieces. So by switching runways to 119, we were able to get 7 the training on hey, here's how you set up the show site from this perspective. Then we're able to fly our Nuke 2, our Nuke 3, and we were able to fly Goldie in the 6th spot so they could see circles and then see a full practice as well from a new runway. So it's like those turnover positions, you look and be like, hey, here on Google Earth, here's the checkpoints I'm looking for, here's the things. They got to do that. So we try to make the best out of the situation. And really the goal was the whole goal is one, to put on our best demo, but two, we got to set the 2026 team up for success. And that's where normally that happens naturally through the show sites and the progression. But we had to get a little bit creative to make sure that they were getting the training and getting the things that they need to start this next season safely and have a great season.
All right, so I have some like quick hit questions I'd love to go through with you, and then we'll transition into like some technical stuff before wrapping up here. Some of these questions come from our mutual friend Daniel Anderson, who's Wingflex Aviation on YouTube. I'll put a link to his channel down below if you're watching and you're not familiar. But he loves the solos, and he had some questions. So this first one comes from him. How many total flight hours did you accumulate on your Blue Angels tour?
I surpassed just over 1,000. It was like 1,013 or so in a Blue Jet.
What was your most challenging show site and why?
Most challenging show site, I would say, was Colorado Springs, my 6th year. With density altitude north of 10,500 feet. And Boss Scribe flew a very consistent show. It was like roughly 44 minutes plus or minus like 5 to 6 seconds. And I think that show length changed by about 2.5 minutes. So all those comms and everything that we had was just changed it completely. So normally if it's, hey, we're turning off when he gives the second pull call, now it's maybe not be off that, maybe later, or, hey, we've turned in earlier. Then the other thing is normally the solos are flying 400 knots ground. We had made corrections to go up to 420 knots ground for winds or density altitude. To get at least 380 knots over the wings. And 420 knots wasn't even get us 380 over the wings. We had to go up to 440. So there was a lot of things that changed because of that. And then Reno would be a close second. And now you had not as high density altitude, but you added in a whole bunch of mountains that happened to be in the way and some pretty challenging winds.
What was your favorite Buno?
My favorite Buno, probably 165782. Was the one that flew that one the most as 6. But I also, 165539 has a special place. It's the first Blue Angel jet I ever flew, and then also the first Blue Angel jet I ever flew in an air show. So those are probably 2, but I flew quite a few. I flew 14 different Bunos this year. So
wow, isn't that, how many did they even have on the squadron?
Normally we have definitely 6. Maybe I flew 16. I flew a bunch, but that's where luckily Natalia, as our maintenance officer, she let me. My goal was to try and protect Boss. Boss needs the same airplane. I wanted 3 is going to kind of get the next, and then I wanted 6 to try and take out the variables, because all the airplanes have their own personality. It's probably the easiest way to put it. And I didn't want. Obviously, Boston's first year, I wanted to take out some of those variables, let him really learn the demo, learn how to fly it. And the same with 6. I didn't want 6 to be like worried about wing sets and worried about these things. I want him to really work on the mechanics and the fundamentals and be really strong going into the 5-year. That way, when you get thrown all these different airplanes, you get thrown all this different stuff, what's the airplane, and you can kind of learn it pretty quickly.
What was the hardest maneuver for you to get right in both of your years in the demo?
Oh, I would say for the solos, from the solo perspective, anything that involves what we call opposing arcs. So the opposing minimum radius turn, or OMRT, or the opposing vertical pitch. You just add in a lot of variables with turn rate, turn radius, power settings. All these things start to impact. So to get center point on those and get the correct altitudes is very challenging. That's probably the easiest one, but I will tell you, and Buddy can attest to, throughout my time, there was different maneuvers that I loved and different maneuvers I hated, and it kind of went through. From the Delta side, one that I think the delta roll is always incredibly challenging, especially as 5 or 3 being on the left wing. It's a left-hand roll, and we'll get a little nerdy here. So as soon as we are on the same plane, as soon as boss starts that left-hand turn to start the roll, 3 and 5 are now on the inside of the turn. 2 and 6 are on the outside of the turn. Well, somewhere through that roll, you end up back on boss's turn circle, and then you end up outside. But because as 3 and 5, you're looking up at the sky, you have no ground reference to reference where you are in that turn. It's only a time piece. And then in boss's consistency, as to know when you're reducing power, it's when you need to add power. So that one, I think, is always a challenge. I know Loop Break Cross is the one that kind of, it encompasses all of it in the sense that we're making a ton of corrections. And that's the one I usually would give to most people, because from the outsider perspective, it's the formation piece to we're going in 6 different directions and then we're all coming back towards each other. How do we meet at center point on our respective altitudes, and all that is not easy.
And in your final sneak pass, how low were you?
I saw 30 feet is what I saw on the rat out. So we brought it back to the days of when it was the 5 sneak was at whatever altitude 5 felt comfortable with. But yeah, we got down there.
You certainly did. Okay, cool. And then some technical questions for you. We've actually already covered some of these. I'm looking through. If you could, this is another one that I get all the time, and again, if I could get like from a source of record, or the modifications to the F-18 that are made other than the blue paint, like what could you just do a quick rundown of what's different with Blue Angel F-18?
I'll start with we have our own software, so we're on what right now we call 28 Echo V2 Blue Angel. And then we also have a H14 Blue Angel. So for any of the airplane folks out there, that is like or I guess folks that are not, that's similar to like your Mac OS or Windows version that we're running in the airplane. So those give us different things. We have a couple different displays. We have the ability to overlay a TFR on our moving map there with our 30-degree cut lines. We have G to the 100th. We have DME, or the distance from center point to the 100th. And then we also get on our one of our displays, we'll get engine parameters that we normally wouldn't get in the fleet. And an additional angle of bank tick marks from there. Those are kind of the general pieces. There's some other little things, like we've had them install so that the radar starts in 5 nautical mile scale, fully cluttered. For any high AOA maneuvers, so for the solos or inverted flying. So for the inverted, the MRT and the high alpha, we're a couple, and the Fortis for 5. We're ones where we'd use the radar actually to make sure not only visually outside, but we could also look at the velocity vector to make sure we're level. So that's kind of the software side. Then working our way back, the gun has been removed and a smoke tank has been installed. And then in order to activate the smoke, up on the left side of the glare shield sitting in the pilot seat, there's an arm and de-arm switch. That just arms the smoke system. And then on the throttle, next to there's where we normally put out chaff or flare in an airplane. That's where we turn the smoke on and off from there. Just to the right of the smoke de-arm, de-arm on the upper left, there's a inverted fuel pump switch. That will turn on for any inverted fuel or inverted flying. So for solos be inverted, and the Fortis, so the two where we'll use it. Or if we did the inverted tour, was the other one. And then over on the right side of the glare shield, we'll get tanks 2 and 3, which are the engine feed tanks. We have in there, the top 2 lights are green, and those are the high pressure tanks. They should come on green whenever they're at least 10 psi of pressure in the fuel tanks. Directly below those are the red lights. That would be if the PSI in either of those tanks drop below 5 PSI. And to the right of those are orange lights, and those are saying that the inverted fuel pumps are wet. So as long as you're getting fuel through the inverted fuel pumps while you're flying inverted or at any time, those will be illuminated. The next thing we have is we have this 40-pound spring, or it's an adjustable spring. So we will go through spring settings 1, 2, and 3. which roughly equate to 10, 20, and 30 and 40 pounds from that. And that is detachable, so we can basically attach it to the spring. It's only in the longitudinal axis in which it provides that. And then moving back to the seat itself, we have what's called a gunner's belt to strap ourselves in, and a different harness because we walk to the airplane with no gear on. All the gear is already in the airplane. So those are kind of the big modifications that we have that are directly to the airframe.
Got it. And is there any modification to the landing gear?
So there's no modification to the landing gear. However, we have, I forget the exact maintenance term, but the ability to increase the pressure in the landing gear itself. And generally that comes from the diamond dirty loop as well as for the Fortis. If you fly inverted in with the gear down, and the gear weight will actually cause it to sag enough to set a approximate weight on wheels, and then it'll set off. Basically, it tells you that you oversped the tires and a bunch of other things that aren't necessarily true. So they'll overpressurize those in theory to help from that.
I swear I did not land. I am just upside down.
Yeah.
In 2025, the team added a new maneuver, the Delta Aileron roll, which, what was the thinking behind adding that? And were there like challenges associated with it? I know, adding a new maneuver doesn't really happen that often. So how did that come about?
It actually all stemmed from Chicago 2024. So we went to Chicago, and anytime we fly a remote show, because we're not going to do the pitch up break, we're going to do a flat pass to depart. And we found when we ended up having to run into a low show or a flat roll show or flat show, we're like essentially doing 2 flat passes. And we're like, hey, essentially we're doing the same maneuver twice. And we're like, well, that's not as exciting for the crowd. We're like, well, what can we do that one, the Top Gun people there, is consistent and repeatable? And then for the Blue Angels, looks good, or we can make look good without having to practice it every single day. So we're like, well, the Diamond does the diamond aileron roll. The solos do the double tuck over rolls. So I was like, everyone's used to rolling in close formation. Why don't we add 2 more airplanes? And working with Boss Scribe, the essential profile and energy management actually is easier. Supposedly, I don't know anything about the Boss thing. To introduce a Delta aileron roll, which then we can do it from the left or the right from that perspective. And that way we're not repeating any maneuvers throughout a show. It's always something in theory that's a little bit different.
Got it. Cool. Well, it was very fun to see.
Yeah.
Speaking of like changes to maneuvers, you weren't 5 in 2024, but this change did happen in 2024. The dirty roll on takeoff, for the longest time, 5 cleared behind the crowd. But in 2024, you started clearing away from the crowd. Was there a reason for that change?
I think it originally generally started because when you do your timing pattern for 5, the Navy, we like left-hand turns. So if you clear in front of the crowd, that gives you a left-hand roll-in for your timing pattern advice. You clear behind the crowd, that gives you a right-hand roll-in. Now, I think the original reason why 5 used to go left is we'll do what's called out of the dirty roll. When 6 clears, we're going to give winds, clouds, and clears. And we'll give that to Mo and to 6. So 6 will have an idea, hey, what are the winds? And what corrections do we need to start out with before we even get in there? Clouds, where the cloud assessment is, that Mo can then pass that to Boss so he can make a show declaration out of the Diamond 360. And then clears, what clears are the solos going to do? Right after that, 5 will then tell 6 where the Diamond is. If you clear behind the crowd, generally you're flying directly over the Diamond, and you can get a pretty good assessment advice. When you clear in front of the crowd, we're trying to look way across the TFR. Sometimes it's difficult depending on the background from there. But what we did find in 23 at Seymour Johnson, there was where center point was and where the takeoff roll and the runway, Whiskers was unable to do the dirty roll because the clear would have put him directly over the crowd. So we decided in 24, we're like, well, to remove that, if we always clear in front of the crowd, 1, it keeps the jets in front of the crowd, so it's 2 airplanes for the crowd to look at instead of just 1. And it also never puts us in jeopardy of having to modify anything from that perspective. So 5 will still practice in El Centro and still practice the clear to the left in case there's some sort of traffic deconflation or something, some reason to go left, maybe terrain or something in a future show site. But that's kind of where it originated from. And last year, I remember in El Centro, I did one each direction, and I just asked the folks at Compar, I was like, hey, which one do you guys like? And they're like, we like the in front of the crowd one. So that's what we ended up sticking with all year.
Awesome. Like all this stuff, it's a very practical consideration, of course.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then last sort of technical question here. You mentioned it a little bit using the radar. I know the Diamond uses mostly HAT or height above terrain, right? And do you how often do you use radar and for which maneuvers?
Yeah, so we'll use rad out. So there's kind of three altitude sources we can use in the airplane. We have rad out, we have HAT, height above terrain, which also requires the aircraft to have GPS, and it requires to have maps. The digital map system has to be loaded, which is where it pulls some data as well. And then tertiary will have Baro or from there. So for the solos, we'll use rad out generally for everything except for Delta. In Delta, when we get all six together, we're going to use all the same altitude ranging source. So we'll all be in HAT. And then 5 we'll use HAT for the Fortis because we're going to be upside down to get valid information. The MRT, because we're just such a large angle bank, that you're not going to get valid information. And then the same with the OMRT. As a technique, when I was 6, as soon as we cleared from the vertical pitch or the opposing 4-point, getting into the 2 solo maneuvers where we're kind of flying form together, I would go to HAT because where the rad out's located on a lot of the turns off behind the crowd, where 5 is going to be, 5 is actually going to set off the rad out. And you're like, well, I know I'm not at 20 feet. But I need to know what altitude I'm at so I can keep planning out do I need more rate of descent, less rate of descent, or whatever. So that's where I would typically use HAT later on in the demo, just that way I got more accurate information and it wasn't being interrupted by someone in formation.
So a couple questions to sort of wrap us up here. Little broader questions. What would you say are you most proud of in your time on the team?
Oh man, that's a tough one. I think that the thing we talk about on the team a lot is we may never see or never hear of the kids or the people that we inspired. But I think that's probably the piece is hopefully there's some kid out there or, someone that decided where they don't have to necessarily join the military or anything. But what they saw was inspirational enough that they want to be the best version of themselves and go forward and do awesome things and do great things. That's a piece that we may never ever get to hear about. But I think, we talk about 6 jets up, 6 jets down, 1 bird up, 1 bird down. Very fortunate that throughout my entire time that I was able to say that we, from the jets, we brought every jet back. We brought every bird back every single time. So that's a tough one. I'll have to keep thinking about that.
Got it. And I guess a similar question in terms of like stuff that you learned and picked up on the team. Is there like a number one thing that you're planning on taking with you to like the rest of your time in the Navy and like on into your life in general, like something that was instilled in you in your time on the team?
I think that the greatest thing is just the relentless optimism and just positive attitude. That's where we end everything with the glad to be here. Glad to be here can sometimes be a positive or maybe not thing. But at the end of the day, I think that's the kind of importance of the piece in the Blue Angels is to bring that forward to everyone. Is something that hopefully I can carry throughout my time, my Navy career, and through the rest of my life.
Awesome. And last question, why are the solos the best?
Oh, that's where we always joke, 4 hate them, millions love them. I think, there's just something different. It's loud. It's very American. And I remember the first time I saw the solos, I was like, those look like teenagers that stole airplanes and are having the time of their lives. So I think that's what's just, you can't look at them and be like, they're having fun. They're for sure always having fun. So that's what I think, but still love the Diamond.
Awesome. Well, Franz, thank you so much. I don't know if you can see it over here, but I've got 2 die-cast jets, an F-18 and a Phantom. and I've had them since I was a kid, and both of them have number 5 on the tail, because 5 has always been my favorite, still is. And I feel like you have done such a good job embodying the number this year and in your entire time. So thank you for your service. Thank you for your time on the team. And thank you for taking time to talk with me. I know you said every 5 minutes is precious, and you've given me much more than that. So hopefully we can do it again sometime.
No, it was an honor. Thank you very much for having me, Evan. I appreciate it.